Joining me right now is the editor of Spite Online, Brendan O'Neill. And Brendan, I want to talk to you about another topic which we invited you on, but I'm sure you'd want to give your thoughts on the situation in Afghanistan. I know you've written extensively about it for your website.
I just think it's really depressing. And the speed with which the Taliban took power, the speed with which they swept aside the Afghan government, I think that's a shocking indictment of what America and NATO have been doing in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. They clearly, all they did with their trillions of dollars was build a house of cards, which has collapsed in the face of this barefoot medieval army that believes adulterers should be stoned to death and that girls should not be educated. It's incredibly depressing. It's a great humiliation for the West, and it's a tragedy for the people of Afghanistan, especially for the women.
Well, indeed, and the worry is, of course, we didn't intervene in Syria. We're not really doing anything about the people of Hong Kong having their rights taken away, even though Britain still has a role, legal international treaty role in protecting those rights. Apparently, no one gives a stuff about the millions of Uyghur people in concentration camps in China. Across the board, again and again, the West has basically shrugged its shoulders and said, nah, not our problem. There is a point, though, where either there is going to be a world policeman in the United States and Britain often, standing by its side with lots of colonial links to a lot of the countries with problems, or we're just going to all just say, unless it's within our national boundaries, we just don't care about human rights anymore. Do you think that's the way we're going?
Well, there is a problem with Western intervention. Very often, over the past 20 or so years in particular, it has seemed to make things worse. There is a problem there. And if you look at Afghanistan, 20 years, trillions of dollars, lots of British lives, lots of American lives. And the end result is that the bad guys are coming back to power. It's almost the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And on that 20th anniversary, the Taliban, who we said we would push aside, is back in power. Yeah. That is utterly extraordinary. And the truth of it is that the West has lost the war on terror. The first step is for us to be honest about that. The second step is then to ask ourselves, realistically, what can we do to help other people?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It does seem to me, though, that we've spoken to some military people yesterday, and I really thought they put their finger on it by pointing out that actually we in this country have such short electoral cycle attention spans. We want to go in, job done, then we get bored, move on to something else on the front pages on the news, and then we want things to be over. And actually, these are battles, cultural battles and international diplomatic battles that take decades, not just years, they take decades. And we just don't have the stomach for it. And we are very much at risk of basically giving up the West's values, not fighting for our liberal democracies, not fighting for them even at home under the COVID pandemic, it would seem, let alone abroad. And we are just in danger of just sort of having oh, well, it was good while it lasted approach, but never mind And I frankly find that terrifying. If the West is not going to stand up for those values and fight for those values, then who is?
Well, that was always the great contradiction of Afghanistan, which is that the West doesn't really have faith in the values that it said it was going to bring to Afghanistan. That includes democracy, that includes freedom of speech. It even includes the idea that democracy and freedom are superior to Islamist theocracy. Yes. We're constantly told that it's racist and Islamophobic to criticize Islamic practices, to criticize the burqa, to criticize the idea that the Western way of life might actually be better than some of these theocracies in the East. We've been told that for ages and ages. And my question is, how can you stand up for Western values when you don't believe in them yourself? You can't fight a clash of civilizations if you loathe your own civilization. Yeah. That's the problem facing the West right now.
It is interesting. The problems facing the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls, make this next story sort of pale into, one would think, insignificance. But actually, this is about Western values and standing up for those Western values. And this is an Eton College master, Will Noland, who was sacked over what we were told was a controversial lecture about the issues of gender. I didn't think it was controversial at all. His views would have been the views of the vast majority of people in this country. But he's now been cleared by a teaching watchdog, the Teaching Regulation Agency, in a decision held as a victory for British values. Can you just remind us a little bit of what he said and what was supposedly controversial and what caused him to be sacked by the head of Eton?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary case. So Will Noland made this video for older students. It was only for older students to watch, called The Patriarchy Paradox. And it was about relationships between the sexes, the idea that masculinity is toxic, the idea that men are a problem, and lots of those kinds of pretty reasonable ideas, certainly very reasonable talking points for older students. And Eton responded in an extraordinary way and essentially kicked him out. So I think this decision by the Teaching Regulation Agency is a very good one because it is a defense of freedom of speech, which is all too rare these days. And it is absolutely right that everyone should talk about the new feminism, the relationships between the sexes, the idea that masculinity is a problem. These are ideas that should be talked about. The shocking thing, Eton famously has produced loads of prime ministers, loads of military leaders. If even Eton has been overtaken by wokeness and by this anti-masculine outlook, it does make you wonder what the next leaders of the country are going to be like.
It certainly does. Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online, thank you very much indeed.